Let's jump right into this. Picture the scene. It's early morning at the incredibly ancient, bustling Jagannath Temple in Puri. The priests are just waking up to perform their daily rituals, but instead of peaceful chants echoing around, there's just absolute panic. God's jewelry has vanished. And I mean vanished. This isn't your everyday theft. We are talking about a completely impossible, locked-room mystery right in the heart of one of the most heavily guarded sanctuaries on Earth.
So, you gotta ask yourself, who stole the necklace when the CCTV cameras showed absolutely no one entering or leaving? I mean, the temple was locked down tight. Not a single frame of security footage captured a thief. It was, for all intents and purposes, a complete physical impossibility. And yet, the sacred pearls, undeniably gone.
That brings us to Section 1, the temple's strange theft. The morning panic was absolute chaos. But you know, the answer to this impossible puzzle actually lay hidden right there within the temple's own walls.
Moving on to Section 2, Mugu and his god.
Okay, so we need to talk about Mugu. He was an 8-year-old orphan who lived his entire life literally within the temple walls. No parents, no official records, just a kid in torn clothes. But here's the thing that's absolutely crucial to understand. To Mugu, God wasn't some distant, untouchable creator up in the sky. No, to Mugu, God was his best friend. Seriously, he'd sit right in front of the idol and just chat, complain about not getting his favorite food, or even sulk if his friend didn't visit him in a dream. But then you have the adults, the priests, the temple committee. For them, God was an institution. It was all about rigid rules, rituals, and honestly, a lot of fear. This massive contrast in how they viewed God, it's the absolute core of everything that happens next.
Well, one afternoon, that peaceful routine was completely shattered. A woman burst into the temple in absolute despair. Torn clothes, swollen eyes, she just collapsed in front of the idol, literally begging for her child's life. Her kid was in the hospital, and the doctors were refusing to operate without money. And the adults in the temple, they just stood around. They offered up these empty platitudes like, oh, leave it to God, or whatever happens is for the best, but they didn't actually lift a finger to help. Mugu was watching all this, and he quietly walked over and asked the woman how old her child was. Through her tears, she looked at him and said, your age.
Later that night, in the empty, quiet temple, Mugu sat all alone and asked God a profoundly heartbreaking question. Will that child die? If he has a mother, why will you take him? And sitting there in the dark, Mugu felt a distinct response from his friend. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a voice telling him to take the pearl necklace. Mugu asked if God would be angry, but he was just met with silence. And so, Mugu's eyes settled on the pearls.
This brings us to Section 3, Miracle or Crime?
Fast forward to the next morning. Outside the temple, that same desperate mother returns, but this time she is weeping with pure joy. Someone had anonymously sold the sacred pearl necklace and paid for her child's surgery. A life was saved. It was a literal miracle. But inside the temple, it was a totally different story. Mugu was cornered. A guy had spotted him wandering around late at night. Trembling, but completely honest, Mugu told them, I didn't steal it. I just did what God asked me to do. But instead of marveling at the fact that a dying child's life was just miraculously saved, the crowd laughed at him. They completely mocked his innocence. They scoffed at the very idea that God would ever ask a child to steal, completely missing the point that the necklace had just served its ultimate divine purpose.
Which leads into Section 4, Human Decisions and Punishment.
You see, blinded by their strict rules, the committee made a really swift, incredibly tragic decision. They physically escorted Mugu out of the temple. By evening, this young child is just left outside on the cold stone steps. No water, no food. By midnight, as he's out there shivering in the cold, something strange happens inside. A flower wilts mysteriously, and the temple lamps start flickering wildly. These were subtle signs from God, but they were completely ignored by the adults. And so by morning, poor Mugu was found on those steps, totally unconscious and burning up with a severe fever.
Now, it was right at this exact moment that someone finally suggested, hey, let's recheck the security cameras. And what they found, it sent a literal chill down the priest's spines. The CCTV cameras hadn't just accidentally missed a thief. They had all simultaneously glitched and shut down for exactly a few seconds at the precise moment the necklace vanished. There was no power outage. It was technically inexplicable. And here's the kicker. None of the other, much more accessible jewelry was even touched. Suddenly, a very heavy doubt began to creep into the minds of all those adults.
And that brings us to Section 5, God's True Message.
Panic sets in, right? They hurriedly bring the burning, feverish Mugu back inside and place him right in front of the idol. Even in this incredibly weakened state, Mugu just gently whispered that he only did what his friend asked him to do. And when one of the adults angrily asked him, "Well, why isn't God saving you if you're so righteous?" Mugu managed a weak smile and delivered the absolute core message of this entire story. God doesn't always come to save. Sometimes he wants humans to make the right decision. Wow! God was basically testing the humanity of the adults. He was giving them a golden opportunity to show compassion, and they completely failed.
An ambulance finally arrived, and as Mugu was loaded inside, a sudden fierce wind just blew straight through the temple. The adults, they just kept debating, arguing about rules and miracles. But you know, the time for debates was over. The sirens slowly faded into the distance, and shortly after, a phone call from the hospital absolutely pierced the guilty silence in that temple. The doctors had tried everything, but little Mugu had passed away. That realization just completely crushed the temple committee. They had delayed doing the right thing, and an innocent child had paid the ultimate price.
The next morning, one of the priests found a tiny pouch that Mugu had always carried around with him. They opened it up. Inside, there were no stolen goods, no money. There was just an old, worn cotton garland and a torn piece of paper. On it, written in Mugu's broken handwriting, was a final plea. He wrote that if the necklace ever returned, he asked that no one be punished. And he added that his friend, God, had told him that the reward for doing the right thing isn't always staying alive.
And then, the impossible happened again. That very same morning, the pearl necklace mysteriously reappeared right back on the idol. The cameras, once again, they showed absolutely nothing. But this time, there were no cheers. Nobody was celebrating a miracle. The chief priest just looked at the idol and realized the devastating truth. God hadn't just returned the necklace. Their lost humanity had been handed back to them, serving as the silent, crushing rebuke of their absolute failure to act with love when it mattered most.
Section 6, the story's lesson. Let's unpack what this all really means.
Because look, this isn't just a mystical tale, it is a deeply grounded explainer on empathy, on adult judgment, and on how we so often prioritize strict rules over actual, genuine human compassion. For parents and adults watching, the takeaways are super clear. Step 1, always remember there are two sides to a story, even if one side seems incredibly convincing at first glance. Step 2, take the time to truly understand a child's circumstances and their mindset before you react. And Step 3, make your decisions and explain them with love, not just blind anger or rigid authority. The adults in the temple skipped all of these steps, and well, it resulted in an irreversible tragedy.
I want to leave you with this final, really provocative thought. How often do we judge situations before knowing the full truth? How often do we let rules completely dictate our humanity, instead of letting our humanity guide the rules? It's a heavy question, for sure, but it is such an important one to carry with you. If this story and its lesson resonated with you today, type Jaya Jaganath in the comments below, and please share this explainer with someone who really needs to hear it. Thanks so much for learning with me today.